So, Laverne, first and foremost, I just want to say I read the book a lot. I took lots of notes. I have color coded post its, and I think it is absolutely wonderful. Congratulations on being a New York Times bestseller, by the way.
Thank you so much. I'm so grateful. You went out and bought the book and just read it on your own. It's just, I don't know. And this whole process has been, it's just very different. And I'm insanely grateful. The process of writing it was excruciating and torturous
Yeah.
and awful. A few moments of catharsis and fun, but mostly it was torture. Doing the audio book was awful. But what has been beautiful is hearing from people who've read it and are finding connections. And so it feels the idea is to be of service with the work, with my story and what I've learned in my life and how, I mean, so much of it really is about childhood trauma and healing from trauma. But then it's like, it's you don't have to be defined by your family of origin. You don't have to be defined by the worst things that have happened to you. You, as adults, we are responsible for our we're responsible for ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said. And I know that writing this was probably really, really painful to, think about all of the things that you endured because it was a lot. But I will say it is going to be so useful to a lot of people, not just trans people, but cis people as well, because I think that cis people don't really know what it's like to be trans. But if you are trans, then you're going to read this book and it's like I described it in one of my videos as the ultimate it gets better story, not just because, your dream came true and you became a famous actress, but because you finally figured out how to love yourself. And it's really important that you reach that conclusion because throughout the book, you talk about how you were trans and you knew you were trans before anybody even really knew what that was, before you knew what that was. And I really wanted to go back to the childhood moments from the book because there's a moment that really stood out to me and it was the fan moment, right? So you talk about how you won this fan from a Six Flags amusement park and you
Bought
started
it
to
at the
fan
gift shop,
yourself.
actually. I bought it at the gift shop at Six Flags. Yes, but go on.
Oh, gift shop. Okay, yeah. So if I'm remembering correctly, like you were fanning yourself because you saw people doing this on TV shows. They looked really regal, and that moment ended up becoming really significant in your childhood, at least in my interpretation, because something so innocent and cute that you wouldn't really think is problematic was something that led to adults basically bullying you over and it led to conversion therapy for you. So you talk about how you were in your classroom and you were fanning yourself and your teacher took you out of the classroom and told you to do it for another teacher to show them how effeminate that was, which is bad, of course. And then they showed another teacher, and then you end up in conversion therapy with this guy who you described as gay as fuck in your book. Can you just talk about that experience? Because I feel like for a lot of queer people, I don't know if this is true for all queer people, there's a moment in their childhood where their essence becomes undeniable and either they see it or somebody else sees it. I have that moment myself, but like for you, can you just talk about that moment and how it really changed the trajectory of your life and how you viewed yourself at that time?
It was it was pivotal but it was pivotal because the even the therapy thing, like my mom was a single mother and she worked 4 jobs. We were poor, so like paying for therapy and then being a problem. My mother did not have time for her children to be a problem. She was trying to figure out how to keep the lights on, how to pay the rent, how to put food on the table. And then like, for me, I started, dancing tap shoes and art supplies for my brother. So being a problem was not something that was good, that I wanted to be. And there's something kind of in retrospect ridiculous about like it became a huge family emergency. It became an emergency from my teacher. Like that, I was sitting in class fanning myself like Scarlett O'Hara, and it was a way. It was what I did to kind of disassociate, to kind of like go into my own fantasy world because the world around me wasn't so great. And it literally became this inciting incident that led to me sitting in a therapist's office, him asking me if I knew the difference between a boy and a girl. And I said, there is no difference. And the way I reasoned at the time as an 8-year-old was everyone was telling me I was a boy, but I knew I was a girl. So I was like, well, there must not be any difference. And I didn't know. So I'm like, I'm not a boy. Like I was like, I'm not a boy. So I was like, oh, so there must not be any difference. And then I thought I had Dr. Patient privilege, but didn't. He tells my mother, and just my mother yelling at me in the car ride on the car ride home, and just I mean my so much of my childhood was my mother yelling at me and being very abusive, just sort of unhinged. Like there was an unhinged quality to my mother's anger and wrath. It would, my therapist thinks that my mother may be a narcissist, and so much of what her issues were what people would say about her, because of how I was behaving. I was a well-behaved student. I made good grades, but I was femme, and so that was a problem. Luckily for me, though, after the third session, the diagnosis, or the not the diagnosis, but the sort of the care that was suggested was injecting me with testosterone to make me more masculine. Was the thing that doctor suggested. And luckily for me, my mother thought that was insane. My mother's kind of not into drugs and medicine. When I started medically transitioning, she wasn't into that, as an adult. So luckily that didn't happen. And years later, I was in a support group here in New York City at the LGBTQ Center for Trans Women. And a trans woman shared a story about when she was 12, she went into conversion therapy, and they did inject her with testosterone, copious amounts of testosterone. And so when she finally was time for her to transition, the testosterone had done such a number on her. So feminizing was really, really hard for her. So I feel so lucky that didn't happen to me. But then last year I was doing this, I did a one night only play called The Pansy Craze. It's actually available on Audible right now. And I played a woman named Gladys Bentley, who is a Black lesbian blues singer and pianist who was a superstar during the Harlem Renaissance and during the Pansy Craze. And she wore these male tuxedos, usually white male tuxedos with a top hat. She famously married a white woman. She was openly queer at the time. And she was fabulous. But after the Pansy Craze, she kind of, went out of favor and had to revitalize her career. And many years later, she pops up on the Harpo Marx show in the early 1950s, and she's in a dress and she sings In Their Eyes. And then there's an article in Ebony magazine where she talks about, I think the headline's I'm a Woman Again. And she talks about leaving her sinful ways, finding God, marrying a man. She actually took classes to learn to cook and clean for him. And she was injected with female testosterone, with female hormones. They injected her with estrogen. And this is in the early 1950s. So this is something that doctors were doing for decades as a treatment for gayness and transness. So you're not, so it's for someone who's a gay woman. She did, wear suits. She may have been a little trans, a little gender nonconforming, whatever. But the conflation of sexual orientation and gender identity, it's like, if you're gay, I'm going to inject you with testosterone. If you're a man, and estrogen if you're a woman, and somehow that's going to like correct your gay. It's like it actually makes no sense.
Yeah.
At all.
Yeah, There's a lot of pseudoscience behind it, and there's just a lot of confusion that adults unwilling to acknowledge the existence of queer people like insert into kids. And one moment that stood out to me when you were really young is how you talked about the mixed messages that you got from your mom and from grown-ups who essentially they would always bemoan the kids around the neighborhood because they were hoodlums. But at the same time, they wanted you to be more like those kids because the kids were masculine. And it was utterly confusing to you. I remember you describing it that way in the book because you didn't know what they wanted you to be and you were just you. And like one of the takeaways from this book is that if you are trans, like your entire life, society subjects you to just this nonstop gaslighting campaign. And it's hard to deal with that, especially when, for you, you're a Gen Xer, and even in your generation, there wasn't necessarily language to describe what gender nonconformity was, what transness was. So you were kind of having to navigate this without knowing what this was, or if there was anybody else like this. Can you kind of just talk about how, despite all of the confusion that society, tried to throw into your life about who you were, how you finally found yourself?
It really was moving out of denial. I always knew. Like, I always knew that I was a girl. What happened with the conversion therapy, like before, there's a pre-conversion therapy and a post-conversion. Before conversion therapy, I danced around all the time. I was myself. I was free. I danced. I fanned myself. I just was Laverne. And after the conversion therapy, I was like, I started monitoring my behavior. I started monitoring how I held my hands and how I walked and how I sat. And so I began to kind of try to modulate myself. And I was constantly watching myself, and it was very exhausting. And I wasn't very good at it either. Even as I was monitoring myself, my femme just could not be contained. And it was the shame, the intense sense of shame that developed too after that. And when I talk about shame, I specifically referring to Brene Brown, the way she defines it. She says that guilt is, I'm sorry, I made a mistake, and shame is, I'm sorry, I am a mistake. And so the book is in three parts. The first part is what's wrong with me. Second part is what happened to me. And the third part is what's right with me. And that, like, I deeply internalized that there was something wrong with me, and that the only thing I can do was to become another person to be acceptable. I have to become a completely different person. And so that's what I tried to do. And I disassociated, and then puberty happened, and I just really disassociated. I just left my body completely until I started medical transition at the age of 26. So you can think about how long that was. So there was, I had heard about, like, when she, and to be clear for people, when Miss Ridgway said I would end up in New Orleans wearing a dress, I don't know if you said that part. So that was what she called my mother and said. That the idea of that in my mind as an 8-year-old was like, I would be some sort of derelict on the street, that I would be homeless and maybe doing sex work and being not being successful, and being just a cultural societal failure, an outcast, a degenerate. And I was a straight A student. I wasn't going to be a degenerate. So that's how this problem of me being so feminine and potentially ending up in New Orleans wearing a dress was like not something that in my 8-year-old mind was a good thing. It was something that would be meant I was a failure, that I was the worst of the worst, is how I internalized that. So I had seen something, I watched Donahue and I watched, Oprah. So there were like trans people on those shows, and I had heard about transsexuality, and I would always watch. I would always lean in, and but I never associated it with who I was, because I would always see, I think the representations were these, I think women, like some of the women were very elegant and smart, but it felt like they were bimbos, or it felt, I don't know, it was just probably my own internalized transphobia. I just didn't connect to any of those talk show trans women that I would see. And so it was just this. So even as I tried to kind of like suppress my femininity, I when I got to high school and I went to the Alabama School of Fine Arts, and I was in a dorm and I was away from my mother, I started exploring my gender more, and I started wearing girls' clothes and women's clothes, not dresses or skirts, and I started wearing makeup. And so I was, we would have I was gender nonconforming. That's I didn't have that language then, but for me, I was just expressing myself, and I needed desperately to express myself. There was just something. There was a person, I wanted the world to see me. Like I had this desire to not be misrecognized, to not be, I needed people to see me. And so that was what I did. And it was torture the whole time. And if I could have done something more conventional in terms of gender, I would have, because it would certainly make my life easier. But it just didn't. I mean, the turning point really was it was 1997. I went to San Francisco. I was in a car accident. I got a little settlement. I was just really stressed out in New York, waiting tables and trying to survive on tips. And then just the daily harassment that I dealt with. Being gender nonconforming, I think, is probably the worst thing you can be. Like, because for a trans woman, like after I started hormones, some people, I was cis assumed by more people. Like there's always someone who's going to read me as trans, but when you're non-binary and you're visibly assigned male at birth, but like you have a full face of makeup and you're wearing a dress and you have long hair, it is, at least in New York, it was, every day was torture. Walking out of the house, I had to armor up. People would burst out into laughter when I would walk into a bodega or onto a subway car. I was constantly, people would yell, "That's a man, that's a man." And like, it was just, I never felt safe, never. And it was just all of those years of living in New York dealing with that, but then also my whole childhood of like never feeling safe. And so I went to San Francisco in September of 97, and just like to just get away. And I was staying with my brother. He was living there at the time. And like the third night I was there, I like had a nervous breakdown and like shaved my head. And I was like, I'm going to try to be a boy. And it was just too much. It was just like the day to day of like what I had to deal with as a gender nonconforming person was just, I was so exhausted. I was so exhausted from it.
Yeah, you can tell in the book as well, that moment was really pivotal. And it was also so hard to read because before that moment, you were finally starting to really embrace who you are, feel more comfortable in your own skin. You had been wearing Salvation Armani, as you described it, thrift clothing that you had kind of fashioned into your own style and whatnot. And, you were doing more things to make you feel comfortable. And at that moment, it was shocking to read because it felt like after you had made so much progress in self-love and accepting yourself, society had effectively bullied you into being something that you're not. And so when I read that particular passage of you shaving your head and having that nervous breakdown, it almost made me tear up because it was really difficult to see how even when you start to really love yourself and embrace who you are, society always has a way of beating you back down. And so that was a significant point in the book. And one thing that was really, just as a cis person, that was shocking to me is even if you start to flirt with gender nonconformity, there are parameters that were put up back then, which isn't that long ago, but there were parameters put up that really made it so that way there were still acceptable ways to be non-conforming. And there was a passage I actually wanted to read.
Yeah, please.
So it was about when you had kind of gotten to know some drag queens. And I just want to read this because I wanted you to kind of like expand on this. So you write, there were some drag queens who felt like you're a boy during the day and then you do drag at night. But if you mixed it like I did, if you were dressed in the daytime or wearing makeup, this was seen as strange. And this was at a time when just being trans was still something that was viewed as taboo. You can dress as a different gender, but you just have to do it only as something that's temporary and fleeting. You can't have that be your permanent identity. And just like, can you talk about the struggles with that? Because that to me was something that was like, as a cis person, I've never had to deal with that. So it was really shocking to read that, because it's just so sad that even when you start to defy norms and, reject the gender binary, there's still so much things that society tells you you have to do to align, even in those circumstances where you're already outside of the norm.
Community. Yeah. I remember not caring. I remember like being really surprised. So by the time, I was at Indiana University when this had happened, and I had already, I think, read my first Bell Hooks book. And so there was this drag queen who I knew did drag and was like talking shit about me and saying basically suggesting I was mentally ill or something was wrong with me because I was, wearing makeup and dresses during the day. I kind of thought it was funny, but there was also like an irony of drag queens sort of like dictating. But there are people, there's like trans women who try to police other trans women to this day. And there's like, that still exists. And so I thought it was funny. It didn't affect me, but I thought it was important to put in the book because this intra-community conflict or differences of how we should present have always existed and persist. And what I've been saying to people now is that like the fascists actually, they don't even distinguish between you and me. They really do. Yeah. Oh, he's gay. Oh, she's okay. All of you go.
They hate us for the same reason. Like, you're born a certain way, you have to meet these expectations.
And that, I wrote a piece for the New York Times, 15 years ago. And it was because it was a conversation about like, should trans people be a part of the LGBTQ community? None of these things are new. And I talked about and I remember talking in the op-ed in the Times about how whether we should be or not, we are, because of the way oppression works. And in the patriarchal imaginary, I love the patriarchal imaginary. You are less of a man if you have sex with another man, and you're less of a man if you are feminized and a woman. So like, there's not like, in the patriarchal imagination, there's like a demasculine, like you're no longer a man if you do certain things. And so the conflation of sexual orientation, gender identity in the patriarchal oppressors' imagination groups us together. And so our fates are like linked, whether it's something different or not. When the oppressor isn't educated around their bigotry, right? Around sex. They're just like, this isn't normal, and we must enforce, rigid gender norms at all costs. And we know that this is a very Western colonial construct, that is indeed a construct and is very Western and is very colonial. And so people who insist on, being anti-trans and enforcing this gender binary model are enforcing a very colonial model that is tied to white supremacy as well as transphobia.
It's all interconnected. And one thing that the way I visualize it is that there's the good, as society would describe it, if you are assigned male at birth. And the further you sway away from that good, which is masculinity, the worse off you are, the more bad you are. Whereas, at that moment with the drag queens in the book, it brought up this idea of, this trope in the gay male community where there was this idea that was derogatory, where it's like no fats, no femmes. I remember this, to where, even if you are within this community, it still exists. Absolutely. The health standards and whatnot, or the beauty standards for like queer people, that's a different subject too. But like, even within this community where you should be accepted, there's still expectations, because the further you get away from that masculine good, the worse you are perceived. And one thing in the book that really struck me, just as a cis person, is how similar trans people are to cis people in the sense that they just know what their gender is, right? And like I have a trans niece right now, and ever since she was able to make decisions that would be seen as gendered, such as the toys that she likes, the movies that she watches, she chose female. And I did the same thing, albeit as a cis kid. I just always gravitated toward male things. I'm gay, so I have feminine qualities, but it's not necessarily going to be the same thing. And one thing that I've started to notice, and I'm sure you've noticed this too, and I think it's probably more prevalent with UK transphobes, is that there's this pseudo pro-gay, anti-trans talking point that like there's no such thing as trans kids, and the parents of trans kids are essentially misreading what is homosexuality, and they're turning their kids trans.
Tomboys. They're tomboys.
They're tomboys. And to me, that's so frustrating because, like, as somebody who is cis but gay, like you could tell from a really early age that I was different. I didn't know what gay was, but if my parents tried to push me into being trans, if they tried to put me in a dress, I would throw a temper tantrum because I wouldn't feel comfortable in that. And so they genuinely don't see trans people as discovering their gender in the way that cis people do. And I find that so frustrating because like if you read through your book, it's evident that like you were not pushed by no means towards being trans. And there's still this idea in society that like there's no such thing as a trans kid. It's the liberal parents who are hyper progressive who are pushing their kids towards this when it is painful to be a trans kid.
For them to come up with that narrative too, it's like no right-wing narratives are really usually based in any kind of empirical reality, but right. It's full whole cloth because like the parent, like a lot of conservative parents, Debbie Jackson was this amazing woman. I think she's from Mississippi. She was testifying before the state legislature many years ago. And she said, there's a lot of ideas about parents of trans kids, that they're liberal. I'm conservative. I'm a Republican. I voted for blah, 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 that we're atheists. I'm a Christian. Like she was like this Christian conservative woman whose child said that I'm trans, and she had to figure it out. It's not something she was like, okay, let's go. She was like skeptical, and she took the child to the therapist and the doctor. These are things that parents, I know so many parents of trans kids. I don't know any parent who's been like, let's do it. It's like right. Pediatrician, therapist, how, like, is this gonna go away? It's a whole. Then if they are conservative and they have to grapple with it, I met a parent in Seattle. I was in Seattle. She's more. She was liberal, and so she accepted her child, but it wasn't just like, okay, it's like doctor, therapist, pediatrician, like how do we? And then if you are wrestling with it, you have to pray. You have to like. None of these things are taken lightly, and the insanity that they're pushing, that people are just that the suggestion that our dementia addled, pedophile dictator president, that you go to school one day and you get a procedure and you come home. And I'm like, with my girlfriends and I were joking, like, where is that school? Where is that school where you can
we get free healthcare in America now? What?
Free healthcare and then come out the same day? Girl, like, where's that? I'm like, please tell me. The girls would love to know where this school is, Trop, where you go in the morning and you come out. Like,
right.
It doesn't work that way. I mean, like, wouldn't that be amazing? Like, honestly, for like the girl, it's like the girls were like, where's that school?
Right. It's agonizing. And a lot of times, and you read about this as well in the book, that, this is not something that your mom took lightly. When you and your brother Lamar were heckled, I believe you were leaving a mall, and, there were these bullies that hurled F-slurs at you and your brother. Your mom went home, and then she later was really apoplectic about the fact that, like, oh my God, am I raising these kids wrong? She described it a different way. But, and I remember my mom doing the same thing, or saying the same thing to me, even though she accepted me when I had come out. She asked me, what was that?
How old were you when this? Tell me about that. moment?
So when I came out, I was 22 years old, and I remember my mom asking me like, was it anything that I did? She was
Mm.
okay with it by the time I had come out, despite making homophobic comments previously, because that was just the default. But I remember her asking me like, what was it that I did, in your opinion, or was there anything that I did to make you this way? And it was like, no. And I would like, recall moments in my childhood where you could really tell that I was very obviously different. Like there was, much like, you were growing up as well. When you're super young, there's no word to it. Like kids who are 5 aren't saying, I'm gay, I'm trans. They're just kind of being themselves. And the only difference in
The other
society
kids are
today,
saying things that
exactly,
I mean,
exactly.
I still am gobsmacked at the like 3-year-olds and 5-year-olds knowing the F slur and knowing sissy. I didn't even know what these words were. So my
Yeah.
first interactions with kids, I'm being called a sissy, I'm being called the F slur, and I don't even like, what is it? I didn't even know what it was, but they knew, and
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
they learn it.
And then the one thing though that is different is that parents are no longer basically bullying their own kids. Some parents aren't bullying their own kids. Rather than saying, "Hey, you have to act like a boy," or "You have to act like a girl," or "Don't be a sissy." That's one thing I was told by my dad. That's changed because like your kid is just being themselves. Like we have
It's
like
changed
conservatives.
in some families.
Yeah.
There's still a lot of, particularly in Black communities, and there's still a lot of, this isn't acceptable. There
Right.
have been celebrities who've come out and said, I would beat my child if they were gay, and so there is still this. And when you mentioned earlier, like when my mother was like, "You never leave this house, and all the other kids are out there doing this, and you're not normal," like there are black people, maybe non-black people, but I don't know, but I'm more familiar with my community, who would almost rather you be a criminal and a drug dealer than like trans or gay, and because at least that was like masculine and patriarchal. I mean, the extent to which so many people have internalized some of the most negative aspects of like patriarchy and toxic masculinity is shocking. That they would rather
Yeah.
have a toxically masculine child than a gay or trans child is um, really fucked up for me. To me, I,
Yeah.
I'm anti-patriarchy. I'm like, I'm not. I think these things are very problematic, but
Yeah.
it is telling.
It's
Um,
not just your community too, because I remember somebody who I had come out to had they were really struggling to accept it, and I told them like, listen, it's not something I'm doing to be like rebellious or anything like that. Like this is something I struggled with since I started going through puberty, and I even made like this suicide pact with myself to never accept it. And that person later told somebody it would have been better off if he like just offed himself. So there really is this idea that like being queer is the worst thing that you can be, even worse than being a criminal, because at least you're still straight and normal. You know what I mean? So I resonate with what you say there.
yeah, no, and it's the I'm assuming this isn't a friend anymore. For him to say it would have been better if he had offed himself, that I think that underlies a lot of what is going on in this
Hmm.
country now with as the Limkin, Institute has said, their genocide experts have said they were on a slow walk towards genocide of trans people. That there are a lot of people who feel like well, if you can't, conform, you should just die, and that is unfortunately a reality. That like, I mean, hate crimes have escalated. We know, according to Trevor Project, that in states that have trans legislation, the bullying of trans kids like escalates like
Yeah.
exponentially, because I mean it's sanctioned by the state, so like people feel emboldened to be even more transphobic. Children, and obviously the whole country, it feels emboldened to be intensely transphobic. It's like the way that we're just such a joke. They'll just like, oh, trans this, men, men and women sports, we believe. I mean, it's just such a like, and it's just kind of the laziest political
Yeah.
argument from conservatives. It's like evoking trans people as some like, as we're just like it's just deeply dehumanizing.
Mm-hmm.
How successfully they've dehumanized us is something to study. It really is something to study, because it is probably because we're such a small portion of the population. I think the sports question, that sports was the Trojan horse, because bathrooms didn't work. But I think the fairness in sports, but then even the language they use, men and girls sports, that evokes that imagery is like a grown man, someone like you, in girls sports. And that is intentional. That is deeply dehumanizing. Gender ideology. I don't know any trans people who use the term gender ideology. That is a turf, that's turf language. But I'm not an ideology. I'm a human being.
Right.
Gender ideology. I mean, gender experts, Judith Butler, people who've written about gender extensively don't use the term gender ideology, it's gender studies, but gender ideology. But it's a great way to stigmatize and dehumanize us. So we're not even people. We're an ideology. We are mentally ill. We are. I mean, that Supreme Court case when I was on the trans sports, when, oh my God, the Solicitor General dude, and the oral arguments was like, biological men who believe that they're women, like language like that goes a long way to just like deny the manhood of trans men and the womanhood of trans women, a female identifying male, like this crazy language to just make us not the human beings that we are. And then in that dehumanization, because there was a period that's been around a long time when trans issues used to be discussed, they would invite trans people on to actually have those conversations on an MSNBC or a CNN or HLN when that existed. But now they don't, and people feel emboldened. I was even watching a Breaking Point with Crystal and Sagler, and I love Crystal. That they were talking about and trying to be reasonable, but they were talking about trans folks, no trans person there, and then I think Crystal said, well, children transitioning is something that can be debated and something that we should discuss. And I was just sort of like, why? Do you have a trans kid? Are you a doctor? Are you the parent? Are you the trans kid yourself? Why is it your fucking business? It's actually none of your business. The fact that that everybody feels like they can debate whether the healthcare. If a child had cancer, or some other health condition, and there were board certified, protocols and procedures that were in place to save that kid's life, to treat that cancer, to treat that, diabetes, whatever it is, people wouldn't be going on CNN and debating whether we should treat the kid with cancer. They would say, like, go to the doctor and let the doctors handle it. But with trans people, because somehow, and it's like, I hate the language of culture war. I hate it. And because it's not like, I guess for them it's a culture war, but for me it's about my civil rights. Like, it's not a culture war for me when I don't drive, but if my driver's license is invalidated overnight and I can't get an ID that reflects my gender identity, like, that's not a culture war. That's like a civil rights issue. And ID documents are actually supposed to identify who you are. When the Passport Bureau in the 1970s changed the law, allowing trans people to change their passports with the surgery requirement. So, I mean, it's like they weren't so progressive in the 70s. What you had to do back in the day is you would get a temporary passport for a year pending surgery. And that assumed that every trans person was going to have surgery, which every trans person doesn't. And I'll never forget being at the Calhoun Community Health Center in the early 2000s. And I was in the waiting room, and a trans woman, I didn't realize she was trans actually, but this woman sits down next to me and she tells me she's trans. And she was singing with a gospel group, and they had a gig overseas, and her temporary passport had expired, but she hadn't had surgery. And so she was trying to get a doctor to say she had surgery so she can get a passport, and no one in the gospel group knew that she was trans, right? So this is 2005. So like her traveling, if she had gotten a passport that said male, no one knows that she's trans. Like the safety issues that just the safety issues. And I know other trans women I met back in the day, she wasn't able to change her passport to female, so she was traveling internationally, and it said male, and she was like, "I'm trans," and they were like, "What? We don't know. What are you talking about?" And she ended up being strip searched, and then they let her in. But these are the things that happen when we don't have ID documents that reflect who we are. And then God forbid you're in a country where being trans is illegal and they kill us for being trans, and you need to go there for whatever reason, and you don't have an ID document that reflects that. That's just one thing. But access to another thing they're doing is trying to get the records of trans people from healthcare providers. They're trying to get records of everyone who's trans, kids and adults, and it's a list. And I'm like, this is supposed to be private, but it's also, when you look at what's happened in Cleveland, I think you covered it, but the Cleveland clinic basically capitulated to the administration and closed their gender transition clinic, closed it, paid a fine of like $300,000 to the federal government. And then the federal government's like, that's not enough. So they are now committed to opening a detransition clinic in Cleveland, a detransition clinic. And we know statistically that it's like less than 1% of trans people actually detransition. So like, where are you going to find
a higher regret rate for knee surgery?
I mean, exactly. So are we forcibly detransitioning people? And the answer is yes. They're already doing it in prisons now, right? So the Prison Rape Elimination Act and other policies that have existed over the years have basically stated that when you're incarcerated, that you are entitled to medical care. Just because you are incarcerated does not mean that you should not get medical care. And if you are trans and you are, being treated for that, if you're getting estrogen or testosterone or whatever, that treatment has to continue. That's the law. Anyone with a health condition has to have their they have to be treated medically. It's cruel and unusual punishment. It's a violation of the 8th Amendment if you don't. And so how sad it was in 2019 when Kamala Harris was asked about this, people who are undocumented and who were seeking refugee status, who were trans, who were being treated, and she did say, I will follow the law, but like people need a little more, that it's actually anyone with a medical condition in prison, they're still human beings too, and they deserve health care. And trans people are human beings, and we deserve access to health care. But now, under this regime, we are hearing stories about people being forcibly detransitioned in prison. And what a lot of these the bathroom bans, for example, do now, couldn't pass them, but now like 9 states have bathroom bans. It's probably more. These bans criminalize trans people, right? And we've been criminalized before. Cross-dressing used to be illegal. So we had to be wearing 3 articles of clothing associated with the gender you were assigned at birth, or you would be arrested. So trans people were routinely arrested. Cross-dressers, drag queens, trans people were routinely arrested. These anti-cross-dressing laws started right after the Civil War. There were a lot of women who actually fought in the Civil War as men and continued to live as men afterwards. And so there was just this desire to enforce gender. And so the anti-cross-dressing laws sort of emerged after the Civil War. And that's how we know a lot of our trans history, from arrest records, actually.
Wow.
I find that interesting. But so we've been criminalized before. And so you criminalize a population of people. And then we know, just from the new Jim Crow, is when you criminalize people, then you can detransition them. We understand that there were trans people and gay people in concentration camps in Nazi Germany. And incarceration is a way to control bodies, labor. So it is part of a larger project.
Yeah.
Denying us medical care. I mean, the sports conversation. That's just such. Laverne is on a rant now. That's such a
No, go
non.
off.
And there's such a non-issue. It's like the way Republicans act, you would think that there was like, a million trans women who've completely overtaken women's sports. And it is an epidemic that we must pass laws right now to ban trans women and girls from sports. And you would think that it was some kind of emergency based on how many of these bills. I think it's like over half the country right now.
Mm-hmm.
Now it'll be federal, probably with his Supreme Court case, but like 27 states, and they've done it with a swiftness to pass these laws. And we know in many states, this lives rent free in my brain. You should do this insert. Stephanie Rule was interviewing the governor of West Virginia many years ago, and he had just signed a bill banning trans girls from sports. And he's like, we can't have someone take advantage. And Stephanie Rule is like, oh, well, do you have an example of someone in West Virginia who's like taking advantage? And he's like, well, no, I don't. He has to say, no, I don't. Or do you know of any trans athlete? I don't know any. I don't know of any. But you signed the bill. Why are you saying? I don't know. It is just. But that is the case in most of these states. I mean, I think Fisher Wells, who is I think she was was it Kentucky where Fisher?
Yeah, she was the one known trans athlete in the entire state of Kentucky. Yeah.
And she was the one, it was her field hockey team. She was the one who reconstituted the girls' field hockey team. They didn't have a team, and she wanted to play field hockey. She went and found girls who was like, you want to play field hockey? She got the team together. They were practicing, and they were finally ready to do their first match. And then she was told she couldn't play.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think she was 12. This breaks my heart. She's like a 12-year-old girl, poised, testifying before the state legislature saying, I just want to play sports, and I don't think the team was good. It's a team sport. She's not like dominating it. So she just wanted to play with her friends, and they banned her. The one trans girl in the state that they knew of banned her, wrote a whole law for one girl. It
speaks to how unserious these people really are. And it's when you go back to like 2022, 2023, I'm sure you remember this too. There was I think it was AP that posted this analysis, but they spoke to like 20 somewhat attorneys general throughout the country, and not a single one of them could provide an example of trans athletes that they wanted to ban. And the researchers who have looked into this, they have found 5 known trans athletes at the K through 12 level across the entire country, and at the collegiate level it's around 100. But like, if you look at where most of these stories are focused, when you can find an anecdote, it's at the elementary level. You think high school sports, it's just 5. So I mean, like, is it really worthwhile to legislate against the 5 trans athletes in the country? They think yes, because, it's not necessarily about them. As you said, it was a Trojan horse for them. Like, the goal is to at least get people to find some entry point to where transphobia will be acceptable. And once you get them, you hook them, and then maybe they'll be more open to bathroom bans.
It was a brilliant strategy. They focus tested it. They are so well funded.
It was.
They focus tested it. It was a brilliant strategy, because then it's like, well, this trans thing has gone too far. They're taking it too far. And so then it's a brilliant way to dehumanize us. This is, I didn't want to talk about sports for a long time, because people like will get in you'll see a Joe Rogan getting the weeds about like a male puberty and our joints being bigger, or our bones being bigger. So you're already reducing trans people to like testosterone levels, joints, and bones, bone structure. So it's objectifying and by nature dehumanizing. So it's a perfect dehumanization tool. And then so people are not seeing us as human, and then we have to protect the children. We have to protect the children, the old trope.
Every single time.
What's really going on is that I really believe a few things. Trans people are the solution, right? I believe we're actually the solution. If we can be assigned a certain gender at birth, understand that we're not that, and make a decision to live authentically and to define gender on our own terms, everybody can do it. That is a fundamental threat to patriarchal, cis hetero patriarchal structures. Is a fundamental threat to that, because women can make and it's really about controlling women. We don't hear about trans men, right? Unless, I mean, like a Matt Walsh, like he wants them detransition so they, if they're white, so they can have babies.
Right.
And I think what I find really interesting with like so many of the Republican, because there are some. I mean, when Dylan Mulvaney was getting all of the vitriol and that she was getting, and other trans women, they were all white. There's even Dave Chappelle, like every time he talks about trans people, they're always white, because if he acknowledges that Black trans people exist, every argument he makes falls apart, because all of his arguments are about like trans people, gay people getting rights before Black people. Like that's his thing. And talking about Caitlyn Jenner's privilege, that all falls apart when you acknowledge that like there are Black trans people. So this is always racialized. And speaking of which, all of these anti-trans policies disproportionately hurt women, cis women. Just we know this empirically, we know it statistically, and we know it in sports. Black women have always been accused of being men in sports, and the genetic testing that they're now doing in the Olympics that they realized in the late 90s was detrimental to women, they've brought it back in this anti-trans panic. And it's not, and in the 22 years that trans women have been allowed to compete in the Olympics, how many trans women have competed in the Olympics? One, sort of. This Laura Hubbard woman, she's Australian, she was a weightlifter. She made it to qualifying, but didn't make it past qualifying. So I don't even know if that counts as like actually competing. So this is like a very generous, like, so in 22 years, like we've been able to compete in the Olympics, and there hasn't been a trans woman. There have been some non-binary athletes who were assigned female at birth who've competed, but no trans women who've competed in the Olympics. And now there's data. I don't like to get into the data because it feels irrelevant, but now there's data because we actually are studying trans women. There's so few actual studies that had decent sample sizes, because I went on this deep dive, that had decent sample sizes that actually looked at needing enough trans women who were actually athletic, and we exist, but it's not like a lot of us, who were athletic pre-transition and then post-transition. There weren't big enough sample sizes, but now some of the new research suggests that actually for trans women having bigger frames and being on estrogen can actually put us at disadvantages in certain sports. It all depends on the sport, because we have these bigger frames that we don't have the energy to and to accommodate with our estrogen levels. My estrogen, my testosterone is like minuscule. So it's all, I hate getting into the science of it, but it's all ridiculous, because ultimately what it does is it's another roundabout way to police all women, to if you're not woman enough. So then all of a sudden, if you're a woman who's a little butch, you cut your hair. Like there was a girl in high soccer or something in like the Midwest, who had just cut her hair, and a grandfather in the stands was like, that's a boy, that's a boy, that's a boy.
Right. That was in Kenosha, yeah.
Are out of control. And then she had just cut her hair. So there's this girl, this is just all so unnecessary, but it becomes a way to police gender. This is this is the one way to be a woman, and putting people in their roles. It puts more women of color at risk in sports and makes their lives more difficult. In bathrooms, more women are being accosted cis women are being accosted in bathrooms than trans women, when people are have been, these bounties that have been given out to go and find trans women in bathrooms and report them. It's never actually a trans woman. I haven't seen a video of an actual trans woman. I've seen multiple videos go viral of butch or masculine cis women being accosted in the bathroom. So
Yeah.
this, all of this, so it's like in these, and then on the it's also important to know, I think that I don't know, I think this trans sports case that the Supreme Court will, that decision is going to come down. I'm assuming they're going to ban trans girls from sports. And I
Yeah.
don't know if you followed that case, but the way they argued it was so narrow that basically it was like this one girl, the category of trans woman that in the ACLU and Lamb Legal were arguing is a trans woman who's medically transitioned and reduced her testosterone levels to a certain point so that she doesn't have an advantage, right? Because the science actually proves that she doesn't if she has suppressed her testosterone to a certain level. So it was that narrow. So the solicitor general was, so if a man didn't take testosterone but didn't take estrogen but declared that he was a woman, would this apply to him? No, it wouldn't. If they were not, it was very narrowly. So it's not even, so it's a very narrow argument that they made, which was smart. But there was one point, if you listen to oral arguments, where the Solicitor General, the very transphobic, said that, called estrogen a performance enhancing drug. That like if a man takes estrogen, he's still a man and he shouldn't be competing against women. And it's the insistence. It really is like, I've said this for years, but that the idea that like what you're assigned at birth is always and only what you will ever be, that you can never, that basically that trans people don't exist, but it also suggests that intersex people don't exist, which is
right.
It's just insanity. And it's the bigotry. I mean, we're a good scapegoat, right? But also we're a good scapegoat for a lot of reasons, but we are also part of the Christian nationalist agenda of like getting men and women in their place, right? Like it's part of a larger project. And it amazes me because I actually don't think conservatives read Project 2025. Like we did, like,
Yes.
but because it's all in there. And when Caitlyn Jenner, bless her heart, when she got her,
Big fan of her.
and it said male, she was, I was like, girl, this is in Project 2025. Like I literally the day after the election in 2024, I went live on Instagram and I said to anybody who was listening, get your ID documents together now. Start now. This is November of 2020. I think the day after the election. Right now, get your ID documents, make sure you can like passports, see if you can, because passports are 10 years, non-driver's IDs, at least in New York, are 10 years as well. I don't drive, but I have a non-driver's ID. Get your documentation together now. And because, so
she thought Trump would make an exception for her, maybe because she's one of the good ones, I guess. I'm not sure what her logic was, but I feel like, yeah, it was pretty clear Trump was very vocal about what he intended to do, and then he did that.
Yes. And but like there were people like my ex, for example, I was like, because we hadn't really talked about, I remember we had broken up and then like I had unblocked him and we hadn't really talked politics. I was like, this dude this guy to like completely screw my community. He wants to take away our healthcare. He was like, oh, he didn't do it the first time. He's not going to do it this time. I'm just like, they weren't ready. They didn't think he was going to win. There's a whole 900-page document about how they're going to do it. Every single department, Health and Human Services, education, defense, employment, there was a trans part, like how we're going to discriminate against trans people in every single area of Project 2025. And he's like, but even during the first Trump administration, even though they weren't prepared in Health and Human Services, because there's a provision in the Affordable Care Act that prevents discrimination on the basis of gender identity and sexual orientation, which actually allowed trans people to be able to get their hormones covered, and in some cases their surgery covered, because it was illegal. Trump rolled that back. And And because in the same part of that bill, I forget the part of the bill, there's it was based on religious exemption, and it was also an abortion rollback too. Like if you were a medical provider and you had like an objection to abortion because of religion, you could deny. You could if you were a doctor, you could deny an abortion too. So like the bodily autonomy of trans people and people with the capacity for pregnancy have always been linked, and they are linked in that law and in the taking away of rights, and they're linked now. But this Christian nationalist, it's what, because what's interesting about this moment is it's like Christian nationalism mixed with like corporate oligarchy, like, and white nationalism is like white supremacist as well. So that's like that's like the sort of dual project that we're kind of experiencing right now. Deregulation to help corporations partner with this, like, you know, Christian nationalism that's about a sort of white supremacist, faux religious thing that's really about, you know, controlling people and using religious freedom to discriminate against people.
Yeah. Yeah. And they are able to do this not just because, as you said, they had a really effective strategy, which, I wish that more Democrats would utilize, albeit to do good, but also because it's really easy to dehumanize a population that is really, really small and is oftentimes invisibilized. And that's why I think that like your role has been so important, because for a lot of people, your character in Orange is the New Black, Sophia, was like the first trans person that they really felt like they knew. And that was absolutely monumental in terms of visibility and cultural acceptance. And I think that, as unserious as it sounds, I think that the show Glee had a similar effect for gay people, like the story that was told and the way that for the first time people were actually
Will
kind of
and Grace
seeing it.
before that. Will and Grace before that.
Right, right. And Ellen also as well. I mean, love her or hate her, I think that, for visibility really made big strides for just gay people and whatnot. So these moments, conservatives really know that they have to sharpen their pitchforks and push back hard, because these kinds of cultural tipping points, as Time literally called it when you were on the cover, these tipping points, they tend to snowball. And once people start to feel like, oh, okay, this person that I was told that was a boogeyman or this degenerate is actually just like a lovely lady. Like this lady on TV, she's very clearly normal. She's just like my sister or my auntie. And that's fine. I'm no longer afraid. They know that that's the impact that it has, which is why I think that, like, when we saw so much visibility and when, the dam looked like it was starting to break, they pushed back relentlessly and they found some way to dehumanize trans people. And, that's why I think that like your book is really important, especially in this day and age. I mean, it's always been important, but these times you really struggle to find voices that are actually trans. Like oftentimes you hear cis people talking about trans issues, or, you see trans people get suppressed in algorithms and whatnot, because, there's this fear right now that if we don't kowtow to the administration, we get punished.
Yeah. But there's so many, it's not just about me. I have one story. There's a lot of, I have so many, Monroe Bergdorf, Raquel Willis.
Right.
Oh my God, there's so many. Elliot Page has a memoir. Nicole Maines has a memoir. Like there's so many other trans people who've told their stories. I could go on. And so like, it's not just about me, but it's really, and it's because it's really about more stories when it comes to representation. Yeah. And that's when you can see yourself and you're possible, like that genie does not go back in the bottle.
Yeah.
And I felt very despondent and discouraged over the past 3 years. I knew we had lost the culture when the Bud Light thing happened. I knew we were fucked. I was like, oh shit, we're fucked.
That was rough.
And I cried. And that year also, I think half the country had banned gender affirming care for young people. 2023 was rough. And I was like trying to figure out, like rhetorically, like how do because I was not going to go on TV and like debate like
your humanity
and within some right-wing conservative framing. Like, I'm not conceding your framing to talk about my humanity. So I was just so strategizing and trying to figure out how do I address this, and I felt like a failure in some ways. But when I had the privilege of being Grand Marshal of World Pride last year in DC, and I was sort of, in the convertible, and going down the street, and I saw all these families. I saw like people with their infant children and toddlers and teenagers. This teenage girl was running behind the car, and she said, "I love you so much. You're my inspiration." I was just like, the genie's out of the bottle. Yep. We know we're possible, and you cannot put that genie back in the bottle. So that in terms of us knowing we're possible, them making it really hard for us as possible to be ourselves. They're certainly doing that. And I think it's really about us continuing to be human. And then also, like, I think getting really clear about that this is dehumanization, that dehumanization almost always leads to genocide, and that getting really specific about what the language and images. Brene Brown says that dehumanization mainly happens through language and images. So we know when Trump posts video of the Obamas as apes, we know that historically that this is one of the most racist tropes that exist around Black people. So we need to get really specific about what the language and the images are of trans people that's dehumanizing. We need to be calling that out as dehumanization, and then rehumanizing trans people with our stories. And I said this to I was in Chicago, and she's the lieutenant governor who actually won the Senate primary. I can't think of her name right now, Stratton, I think. And she was talking about the importance of representation, and I think representation is incredibly important. And I think it's important. It's important in media, and it's important in the workplace, and it's important in our lives. But representation in politics, I think, is a very different thing. Mm-hmm. I don't think any Black person with some sense has ever thought that Clarence Thomas has had the interest of Black people in mind with any of the work that he's done in the Supreme Court. And replacing Thurgood Marshall with him is just like so disgusting. So I think with politics, it has to be about interest, because we've seen how the Democratic Party has used representation as a way to just put Black faces or women, female and women faces or trans faces within the same sort of imperial oligarch, regime that does not cater to the needs of working class people. To install a Black person to serve, the military industrial complex or to serve corporations that's not representation. Representation in politics is different than representation in media. And I think we need to start making that distinction, because I remember I was critical of Harris on T.S. Madison's podcast, and Black people came for me so hard. They came for me so hard, and I get it, but it's also like, can we have critique? Can we look at, it's not enough to be Black. But Barack Obama was Black, and I love Barack. I love him, and I really love Michelle. Her speech and them as symbols, them as sort of American royalty, the symbolic nature is beautiful. The oratory, that these are accomplished, Harvard Law Review. These are smart, exceptional people. But the Black Lives Matter movement started under Obama's administration. We have the drone strikes, his immigration policy, I think the most detrimental thing, and this is with love. I love Barack Obama. I don't love many of his policies.
Yeah.
I think the biggest one, and Matt Lecht pointed this out on an episode of the Majority Report. FDR, when when we had the Great Depression and the stock market crashed in 1929, FDR bailed out the people. Barack Obama bailed out the banks.
Yeah.
That and here we are. Here we are. And I mean, that was also in an environment where Glass-Steagall was like repealed by another Democratic president, Bill Clinton, and that those two things, like repeal of Glass-Steagall and Obama bailing out, and then the obviously the market crash that happened as a result of that with the subprime mortgages, and then the decision for Obama to bail out the banks and not the people who actually were screwed over with their mortgages has led. I mean, we can even. I think the Trump phenomenon is different. I don't think. I think the people who say that Trump appeals to economic, and Crystal makes this argument all the time, appeal to economic arguments. You can say that, but it was racism. I still think.
Yep,
do you know the book? It's post-racial, most racial. Where several authors wrote it, and they wrote it right after. Right when Trump, I think it was called post-racial, most racial, but they did data. They looked at data and they looked at voters. Before Obama was elected, most people in the Democratic Party didn't necessarily think that because we still had Dixiecrats. A lot of people in the Democratic Party did not associate the Democratic Party necessarily with Black folks.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't until Obama. Those people then associated the Democratic Party with Black people. There were there are people, either they're explicitly or implicitly racist and white supremacists. A Black president fucked a lot of people up, a lot of white racists up. Maybe they don't realize it just like. And you just look at the turnout. You look at the white turnout. Some things stick in my brain. If you remember the turnout numbers in 2016, unprecedented numbers of white people who hadn't voted in election cycles turned out in 2016 to vote for Donald Trump. Mm-hmm. He galvanized and Andrew Gillum said this about DeSantis, and it is true of Obama. He's like, well, you may not be a white supremacist, but the white supremacists think you're a white supremacist, right?
Right.
So, like the racial piece, Trump, and I think that's another thing. And we would talk about my book, but I think that's what it's become. I've always known this, but what it's become, I believe, empirically undeniable is that our inability to own our racist, white supremacist history in this country will be our downfall.
Yeah.
And I quote Brene Brown in the book. She says, when we deny our stories, they define us. When we own our stories, we can write a brave new ending. It is my contention that as Americans, we have not collectively owned our story around the founding of this country on the genocide of the Native people and the building of this country's wealth on slave labor. We have not ever accounted for that on a policy level. Really, we've never done that. And the gutting of the Voting Rights Act that John Roberts has wanted to do since 1980. That's 46 years. He finally, the patience of Republicans, honey. Finally, he has gutted the vote. There's no more Voting Rights Act. It's gone. But there were people who've been trying to get rid of it since 1965. Mm-hmm. So then and those people are still around, right? And those people have influenced the justices who are on the courts now. So they never wanted a Voting Rights Act in 1965. What did they want? They wanted apartheid. They wanted like second-class citizenship for Black people in this country. So this is what, and even when we got like the Fair Housing Act and in 1968, it didn't make up for all of the redlining, all of the housing disparities that had been gone on for decades for Black people, and the main way that Americans make their wealth. Like, there was nothing to like that was reparative. And it's still, there's still landlords and real estate agents who won't sell or rent to Black people in certain neighborhoods. That is still systemic. That is still the system, these systems, these governments. And when we see my ex-boyfriend, I was like, I believe, you know, and this is toward the end of the relationship when I just let it all hang out. I was like, I believe the police are still a systemically racist institution. And he was like, how in 2020, this is 2024, how in 2024? And I was just like, stop and frisk is back. The Supreme Court ruled that was unconstitutional because of it's back. Eric Adams brought it back. And he was like, that's not true. And I was like, what? I was like, what?
I enjoyed that part so much of the book, by the way.
What?
I enjoyed that part of the book so much when you were debating him.
Is that in the book? The stop and frisk part?
I don't know if the stop and frisk part is in the book, but when you were confronting him about his cognitive dissonance, that was very entertaining to me because I'm like, oh my God, Laverne is a debate lord. She's actually a debate lord.
I'm not. But I was just I still have love for him, but I've never dated a man. He's the least smart man I've ever dated. He was insanely hot and he was very sweet and he was very good to me for 3.5 years. Like I felt loved, cared for, seen, all that stuff. And he was fucking gorgeous and hot, but just not very smart. And it was, and in the beginning that was lovely. In the beginning, because we met during a pandemic, and I was just like, I'm in my head all the time. Anyway, I'm thinking, I'm constantly triangulating and thinking. So it was lovely to just like go home and have this like, you know, just fun, free thing. But after a while, it's like, for him to be a police officer and not know that Eric Adams brought back stop and frisk is kind of like, I'm like, what?
They don't know the laws that they enforce.
Like it's back. And I was like, so I Google, I was just like, Eric Adams stop and frisk. Like Google, I mean, like, it's just like the Google, I mean, it's like, and what source do you want? Like AP, Reuters, like whenever we would get into this, I would always cross-reference. I was like, at least pick 2 different sources. What source do you think we should pick? Try and, you know, obviously we should all be doing this. What source? You know, let's do like 2 different sources. And then I also mentioned that there were, you know, many years ago, there was a lawsuit in New York City that was a class action lawsuit that filed by trans women and cis women of color who had been profiled as sex workers. And what appeared to be happening is that in certain neighborhoods, certain usually women of color would be profiled as sex workers. One woman was in sweatpants at like 7 a.m. waiting for the bus, and the police profiled her as a sex worker and arrested her. This is something that often happens when they're trying to gentrify certain neighborhoods. And so then they want to get the people out of there so they can raise the rents and do all the things. And so they start criminalizing the people in the neighborhoods. So this is, they use the police to do this. This is an agent of the state in collusion with the real estate lobby and usually the mayor's office, right, to gentrify these neighborhoods. That's systemic. So when we're talking systemic, I'm talking de jure discrimination, like laws, policies that are being enacted, and we're still systemically racist because there's so many things, because you can't just
move on and look
forward. Free slaves and then just, well, actually, when they freed the slaves, they gave the slave owners reparations, right? So we've been working for centuries for free and traumatized and beaten and raped and had our children taken away from us, but they get reparations. And so there's no like mental health care. I know this is the Mill was talking about mental health in 1865, but like the mental health care, the physical health care. And even I did my family tree on that show, Who Do You Think You Are? My great-great-great-great-grandfather, Bolin Banks, we were able to find him. And he, this is deep. We were able to trace him to 1857. He was bequeathed to his owner passed away. And his the owner's widow, Virginia Matthews, I remember her name, inherited him in the will. So he was listed as property in the will,
Oh my
which is
God.
a deep thing to see. And then he was on it. I saw my first slave registry. And because he had an unusual name, we were able to trace it. So by 1970, he actually was listed in the census as a property owner. But he basically, Virginia Matthews, gave him the property to own. He had to pay money to her to own it, but he could only own it during his lifetime and work that land. So he owned it, but he worked it, but he could not pass it on to his descendants. It would go back to the Matthews family after he died. There's just, when it's so deeply ingrained and so
still denied.
And still denied. And I think that what's happening with the voting, like the fact that, because the same argument, the argument that Roberts argued this year is the same one he argued and failed at in the Supreme Court in 1980. And I didn't know this, and I should have known it. Mobile versus Bowdoin or something was the case in 1980, where the Supreme Court said that if it is unintentional discrimination, that is not a violation of the Voting Rights Act. And it was a case in Mobile where it happened. And just during Jim Crow, they didn't pass what was it, poll taxes and literacy tests and say we want to disenfranchise Black people. They just passed. Right. They never said it. So Congress was lobbied to amend the Voting Rights Act, and finally in 1982 they did, to say that even if the impact of a new law has a racist outcome, whether it was intended or not, it is a violation of the Voting Rights Act. And Roberts, we know now, worked for the Reagan administration and was charged with petitioning the legislators to not vote for it, but they voted for it. So the argument that he had then is that unintentional discrimination is not a violation of the Voting Rights Act. Is the same argument he just pulled out of his ass 46 years later, that what didn't hold water then, but all of a sudden it holds water now because racism doesn't exist anymore. But they were saying racism didn't exist anymore in 1980, that we're past that. Mm-hmm. They've been saying that. And clearly it still exists. Clearly. We just, all the metrics, if your audience knows this, but wealth disparities, right? Maternal mortality rates that are higher in Black women, schools.
Even during COVID, Black Americans were affected more than white Americans. Every single bad thing in this country that hurts people always hurts Black people 10 times more. And it is truly and I'm so glad that you brought this up, because it really circles back to just dehumanization in general. And it's been the same tactic since our country's founding, really. The way that they justify, the otherization and dehumanization of human beings. The playbook really hasn't changed. The subjects of, who they choose to oppress has changed. But all of these marginalized groups, there's this tendency, especially from white Americans, because it makes us feel better, I think, to talk about, racism as something that was in the past that we had overcome, to talk about, even gay rights as that was something in the past that we had overcome. But the systems that oppressed all of these different groups of people all throughout our history are still intact. And, if you just pretend like that isn't the case, or you're like, hey, we freed slaves, we had a civil war, and good luck to them. There's nothing we can do.
Yeah, get over it. Black people are the problem when we bring up racism. It's always us,
right,
who are the problem when we point out something that's objection. God, just Pete, God, it's just in our face. They don't give a fuck. Pete, the Black men and women who weren't promoted in the military, the just the testimony from the Doge doofuses, right? That like
Right.
any grant that had gay, lesbian, black in it was denied. This is
Mhm.
systemic racism. This is the government, Doge, an agency of the government, seeing black in a grant and denying it. The hundreds of thousands of black women who were laid off because of DEI. The only way you could possibly be here is because of is because you DEI and you're not qualified. And the
Mhm.
way, can we talk about the way Chris Rufo, the year after Black Lives Matter, how many of us had heard of critical race theory before 2021?
Oh my God. I was in my
That was a backlash.
PhD class when I first heard about critical theory and then critical race theory. And I'm like, it felt surreal to see everybody talk about this.
They weren't talking about actual critical race theory. They were using it because no one knew what the fuck
Right.
it was. They were using it to create backlash against all the biggest civil rights protests in our nation's history, the George Floyd, that was sparked by George Floyd's murder by a police officer in 2020. And how effective was that backlash?
Yeah.
How these Republicans are diabolical. They completely changed the conversation. DEI, critical race theory, couldn't define critical race theory, couldn't define woke, but like they have
Yeah.
made a whole thing demonizing these things. And like all of a sudden, and now all the DEI policies that a lot of which were instituted in 2020 are gone, are gone.
Right. Yeah. It was a fleeting moment where it seemed like, wow, people are finally starting to center black voices, and white people are finally understanding that black people weren't lying all this time about cops and how brutal they were. And it felt kind of like
It
uh,
was the first
a
time
little bit
in
of
my
a
lifetime, I'm older than you, that there was a national conversation about systemic racism.
right.
It was like, and people were using the term white supremacy. I wouldn't say white supremacy on TV like for years because I was like, oh, people are gonna be,
Yeah.
And so it felt like a watershed moment. But what is so insidious is that it's a corporate thing, it's a government thing,
Hmm.
it's it's
It's
white
a
supremacy.
victimizer of white people because it promotes, people of color who obviously aren't qualified because every white person is more qualified inherently so. And so they just always find ways to take the social hierarchy and turn them into victims, and it works every single time. It worked with Donald Trump in 2024 and 2016. It's worked all throughout history, and it is
A tool of one of the main tools of fascism too.
a
Um,
thousand percent.
victimization by the in group, it becomes the victim.
Yes.
Unreality, referring to Jason saying this book, unreality, all the lies that they tell, delegitimizing institutions, educational institutions, and the curriculum changes. And like, I just want to say about the DEI thing that like, what DEI and there's a I was listening to some podcast. It was like it was empathy training. They didn't call it diversity equity. It used to call it empathy training back in the day. But DEI it was just about giving opportunities. Like when Joanne
Hmm.
Reed talks about being scouted, it's because she was a straight A student and had really good SAT scores. Like they weren't, but they just went to her neighborhood because in an attempt to make a diverse um, campus at Harvard. And diverse campuses are really a great, wonderful thing. They really are. And
Yeah.
so they weren't like picking people. These were straight A students with amazing SAT scores. They weren't picking Don Jr. You know,
I mean, Ketanji Brown Jackson is called a DEI pick. She is the most qualified Supreme Court justice ever, and the best one, by the way, by a mile. And yeah, I think
so
it goes
brilliant.
back to this
Her,
idea.
her decisions and her dissents are
They're second
like
to none.
surgical. She's brilliant.
Absolutely.
She is a brilliant justice. Oh my god! And they
Right.
I mean, we kind of have to be like to be black. We kind of have to really be know what we're doing and know what we're saying. Um,
Hmm.
so it was really just about creating opportunities, and also the DEI was about having black black businesses in like bigger stores, like a Target. That's why we've been boycotting Target, because they like when they let go of DEI, they let go of the black owned businesses that they were carrying in their stores. And so
Hmm.
like all these businesses, like had product, and then all of a sudden it's cut, and they have all this product that they can't unload. And so it's about opportunity, and it's you have to. But if you don't acknowledge that there has been a systemic disadvantage from jump, so that like white Americans are starting on third base and black folks aren't even in the stadium, right? So
Hmm.
it's just about getting us in the stadium. And it's not like we don't deserve, we don't unfair advantage. It's like the opportunities have not been there. And there are legacies of that. And even despite that, some of this, and they'll use someone like me, or they'll use the Obamas and say, well, they are exceptional. We have one or two, so like all black people can do it. And the reality is that this system has always been sort of set up to like prop up one or two, but that
Hmm.
is not, it's not enough. There are so
Yeah.
many people who don't have like the privilege. I was born working class. I'm trans black, but I have the privilege of an education, the privilege of being able to code switch that I learned at the Alabama School of Fine Arts. Like just there are privileges that I have, and like some, one of the skill sets I learned is learning how to make white people comfortable. A skill I didn't know I was learning at the Alabama School of Fine
Mm.
Arts, but I was. So it's we need structural change. We need systemic
Yeah.
change. We have and race is, and we have to actually intentionally incorporate race in those policy changes, because we incorporated it when we fucking wrote this constitution. All the
Right.
accommodations that we made for slave owners, the 3/5 compromise. Oh, we will do slavery up until this, and then and the slave owners were let's breed them. If we can't bring them in from Africa, let's breed them. So the revolution, the American specific invention, I should say, of chattel slavery was born. The
Mhm.
fact that Hitler thought we were too extreme, according to Wilkerson's book, it's
Right.
very telling. But when because I just read her book earlier this year, and she was talking about in Nazi Germany, there were different classes of Jews depending on how much Jewish blood you had in you. And then like Tyla, that singer from South Africa, when she called herself colored and Americans were offended. But like in Haiti back in the day, there's different like classifications if you're biracial, if you're mixed race in some way. In the United States, the one drop rule, and that
Yeah.
was for the free labor. But that no other country, if there is one drop of Negro blood, then you are black. That's only here.
Yeah.
These are the things that we have to address, and it really is a case for reparations. I'm not sure what the policies are, but I think it really is. I think a lot of it is about some universal basic income, probably. I think also just acknowledging the reality of the history that we don't have universal healthcare in this country because of racism. That
Yeah.
that book, I forget the author, he wrote this book in the 1890s, that like black people we're so insufficient that we would die off in a few generations, so we should wait for universal healthcare till the black people die off. And so that argument was used for decades. That book was used, so when European countries were like getting universal health care, we didn't, because of the black people, because they couldn't imagine. And that is reaffirmed in Dying of Whiteness. All the people in that book who would literally rather die than see black people have health care.
Hmm.
We're still there are way too many people. They were specifically talking in the book about the Medicaid expansion that under Obamacare, that a lot of obviously red states refused. And I remember reading about a specific man in the book who he was like had all these illnesses, didn't have health care, and he was on death's door. But he was like, would you want them to expand Medicaid? Absolutely not. I don't want them they don't deserve it. Like they don't deserve it. So there is a phenomenon, and I
Yeah.
do think it's not a large portion of our country. I mean, it's always been around like, 27 to 30 something percent of Americans who are just those hardcore racist Trump people.
Mm-hmm.
They're loud and they have power, and they are useful to the oligarchs and plutocrats who want deregulation, who want to be able to sort of just like, loot the government and make as much money as possible.
They're just, those voters are useful idiots because they're fine never getting ahead so long as people they don't like don't get ahead. And you still really see that. I have a sibling who I won't name who voted for Donald Trump, and this individual is not somebody who would benefit from his policies, to put it mildly. They could die if they lose their Medicaid coverage, but I think the reason why they chose to do that was because they thought Trump would ban trans people from existing, which would, directly impact one of our family members. So like that hate as a motivator.
That was for that family member, like, because usually even when trans issues or something they may not agree with, voters, that's not the issue that most people are voting on. But that
right.
family member apparently.
This is like the one exception of like the stereotype of somebody who's mobilized by anti-trans policy, because I think and this is me this is conjecture, I don't know what they're feeling, but if I had to guess, they feel really like angered about the fact that the family embraced a trans person. They think that that's bad, and they're an outcast because they rejected it. So if I had to guess and put myself in their mind, that was the thinking. But it speaks to like how hate has always been such a motivator, which is why, to your point about like having to actually address the systemic issues, is like there's a difference between equality and equity. Like simply making everybody equal under the law doesn't really change shit. To have actual equity, you have to go the extra mile. And the fact that like we were maybe making baby steps with things like DEI, affirmative action, it's like baby steps, that wasn't even tolerated, really, it like, just as a white person, reinforced this idea that like there is such a fucking issue with racism. Even like as a privileged cis white person, I can tell that like, yeah, if we don't solve racism and actually address, colloquially the cultural war issues, we can't have anything. Because white people would rather cut off their noses to spite their faces. They would rather have every trans person be, erased, every black person be impoverished, just so long as or they would basically rather live in poverty themselves, just to ensure that black people and trans people are also worse off. In particular, that's the point I'm trying to make.
You can pick a white man's pocket if you make him feel like he's better than a black man. You can pick his
yes, pocket. That's exactly. So to kind of like put a little bow in our conversation, I think that like going back, there's all throughout our history, as you said, and I'm so glad you brought it back to like the historical aspect. We've just always, as a society, accepted that like some people are just going to be underclass. They're going to be otherized. They're going to be second class citizens because like it makes everybody else in society feel better, and that's useful. Yeah. Because if they feel better than others, then maybe they won't feel too bad about the oligarchs who are pickpocketing them. It goes back to that like meme, as dumb as it sounds, of like the oligarch who's looking at the worker with the plate full of cookies saying, hey, that immigrant wants to take your cookie. Like there is a tool in otherizing people and oppressing people for capitalism. And it's existed even before capitalism was a thing, but it really is reinforced in this hyper-capitalist system. So I feel like what you talk about and the way that you always bring it back to the systemic is really, really crucial. And before we close, I just want to give you the opportunity to say any last thoughts about anything, your book or just politics in general.
Gosh, I have so much to say.
I've took up so much of your time though, so thank you so much. Okay. I really appreciate this.
It's built in. I was like, I want to talk to you, and you can clip it. You can do what you will with this. I think like I do think like the woo woo part of me is like, how do we start to rehumanize each other? Like, yeah. And I think this isn't like 2024 like rehumanizing. This is 2026. We have a fascist regime that we must fight. There's no negotiating with people who want to exterminate us, who want us not to exist, right? We have to defeat the fascist. And that is order number one in this moment. But this is an opportunity. This really is an opportunity. What this regime, if we believe, and I like to believe this isn't happening to me, it's happening for me. What is happening for us is like seeing. I see so many Americans seem to be understanding the relationship between liberalism and fascism, right? That like
Mm-hmm.
that liberalism leads to fascism, that they would rather collude with the fascists than collude with leftists because of the ways in which they've been bought and paid for by corporations as well. So it's an opportunity to really like I constitutional convention. I mean, like order number one, if we're able to take, first things first, if we're able to take this House and Senate, we need Supreme Court reform. Supreme Court
Yeah.
reform is first order of business because we're not going to be able to, and then getting money out of politics. I think those are the two. And then there's something there's two, that the leftist media has not been covering much in Hawaii. And I don't know the status of it right now. Did you read about Hawaii?
Oh, yeah, about how they're overturning Citizens United, essentially.
They were able to pass a law in Hawaii that basically took money out of politics in Hawaii. And there's a ballot initiative in Wisconsin. They were able to get signatures, and no one's covering this. And I've been wanting to cover it and talk about it, but I'm not a content creator, and I have a book, and I'm an actress. But Wisconsin, they because I'm talking to Sam Cedar when I did Majority Report 2 years ago or however long ago. I asked him about because I was like ballot initiatives. I was looking at ballot initiatives in relationship to reproductive rights and seeing how conservative states were like, saying, yes, we yes, abortion, please. And when the people get to vote on it. And I was like, if people got to vote on money out of politics, the people will want money out of politics. And so I in my mind, at the time, I floated to Sam, like, what if we got some benevolent billionaire? I know that is
taboo.
What is it? A paradox.
Yeah.
That to fund ballot initiatives, right? To get signatures and get ballot initiatives all over the country. But Wisconsin has done that, and they got it on the ballot. I believe they're voting for it in November. I have to triple check that. And in the Chamber of Commerce, all the business interests were fighting tooth and nail against it. But it was just a grassroots push in Wisconsin, and basically it would be in local, state, and federal elections that they would, and I'm not sure how they phrased made the law so it's not a violation of Citizens United, but that is a really positive thing. And the law that they did in Hawaii basically is like states actually regulate corporations. Like you incorporate in a certain state, so they're not even going around the question of like, speech and are corporations people. Does this corporation have this mandate in this state? Like the state, individual states actually can tell corporations what they can and can't do. So I believe there's another state that's attempting the legislative route around getting money out of politics. I think there's another state, but this is I don't know why it's not getting a lot of news and a lot of attention, but I think it should be getting a lot more attention because we got to get money out of politics. It's like we got to reform the courts, and we got to get money out of politics because we don't have democracy. We don't have people working for us as citizens. We don't have it as long as we have money in politics. And that was what was so encouraging about the DSA wins in New York last night. And I feel like the public is just wiser. I think they just understand that like the public seems more educated and more galvanized, but it does help to have leaders who are communicators, who can communicate these messages in a way that people can understand it. But like when gas prices are this high, when price of food is this high, you don't really need a messenger.
Yeah.
I mean, like the way
we're at that point where things, you know how people say sometimes it has to get worse before it gets better. It's kind of like at the worst part. And so, how
still could get worse, but like the ways in which Trump has snatched victory from snatched in defeat from the claws of victory is astonishing. The Iran thing was handled. Like that was one of Obama's, arguably his best policy. Like that was effective and working, and he ripped it apart.
Mm-hmm.
For
It's
for
amazing.
this,
It's amazing.
the tariffs,
It
the
gives me
insanity of
hope.
the tariffs. I mean,
Yeah,
what the tariffs and
right.
inflation. I mean, just like the economy, he's supposed to be good on the economy. Like, and it is the economy, stupid. People are
Yeah.
gagging. People are gagging. It's like, it's so fucked. And there's
Yeah.
obviously they're not going to do anything to rein in corporations who are price gouging.
No, never.
And then these data centers.
Oh
These
my
data
God.
centers are like,
Everybody hates them. Nobody likes these. Nobody
and
wants them in their
but
backyard.
in the long-term damage, this can take. Do you see that water? The water from the data center? Did you see that More Perfect Union video that AOC did?
No, I haven't seen that one yet.
She did a video with More Perfect Union where she went around to different cities to talk about the data centers. But then someone testified in Congress, and she had brought the water from the data centers. It was brown water, and they were
Oh my
claiming that it
God.
was drinkable. It was brown. It looked like fecal matter was in the water, and this is the water where the data centers are. So
That's just not, people aren't going to be okay with this.
it's
I
they're
will say
not.
it gives me
They're
hope
like,
to know
the
that the
interesting thing.
opposition is so bad.
Say that again.
No, I was just gonna say, because I'm always very negative, as you know. It gives me hope to know that like the fascists in the country, they are really stupid, and so all it takes is like a semi-competent Democratic Party, and I really think that they are beatable. To add
But
some hopium.
it needs to be semi-competent. It has not been. It has
Yeah,
not been.
exactly.
I'm
That's
sorry,
that's
yes.
the operative word. It has to be at least semi-competent.
I mean,
Although one thing,
a lot of the
sorry,
special election wins are just because Trump is so bad. But when we
yes,
have candidates who are not taking money from corporations and who advocate for Medicare for all, and like these, we are seeing that connect to the voters.
hmm
So
right,
that is a bit of hope. We'll have to see what happens in the general
yeah,
election. We'll have to see the ways in which, because people are like, with AOC, they're so critical of her, but she was so kneecapped once she got into because she was the most popular squad member, and
hmm
and Pelosi and the establishment just kneecapped her. If she didn't, I believe if she didn't play ball, she wouldn't have been on any committees. She would have just been. I mean, she could have agitated from the outside, but like the way that you get power is committee is in the Congress. Our committee assignments are being able to like make policy. There is an argument. I don't know what your thoughts on it of her agitating from the outside, but they would have they kneecapped her in the establishment when she got into Congress. So it just the people. I mean, critiques of her. There are many fair critiques of her, but I think that piece around the establishment like shutting her out. I mean, who is it? I think it was Katie Porter. Even she was taken off Ways and Means because she was upstaging Waters allegedly. That was
Oh, I never heard that.
yeah, allegedly.
Okay,
Allegedly.
okay.
And we love Maxine, but Maxine can retire. Maxine could go sit down. She's been doing this for a long time. She people have been reclaiming their time for decades, but she made it into a thing. Girl, it's go sit down. Oh my God! Did you see the Fetterman? He like his insider trading like is through like
Fetterman's is.
yeah. These people. Anyway, we could go on and on and on about
We could I could talk politics with you for an entire day, and I feel like you should start a podcast because I could listen to you, and I think a lot of people would say this. They could listen to you talk about politics forever because you are super super tapped in. You are knowledgeable. And you actually know what you're talking about, which is actually so uncommon these days when it comes to podcasters. So give that a thought if you want any extra work to do.
It is a lot of work because to know what you're talking about, one must read, one must
A lot.
and I don't, and there's some things I'm like foreign policy, like I feel like since October 7th, I've lived in New York and I have like tons of Jewish friends, but like Zionism never came up as a thing with any of
It's a
my
learning experience for a lot of people,
like
I think.
30 years, like literally
Uh-huh.
30 years I've lived in New York, and one of my best friends, like, a lot of Jewish people all over my life, like
Yeah, yeah.
it's New York. There's lots of Jewish people. Zionism has never came up, like never
Hmm.
came up. So I'm like,
Well,
Zionism.
even a lot of leftist creators in this space, I talked about Israel Palestine beforehand, but a lot of people talked about how it wasn't until October 7th where they really had to dive into the history and research because on its face it looks like it's a very complicated subject, but when you do a little bit of digging, you pretty quickly find, oh, this is another settler colonial project, and the United States, of course, is the wind beneath the wings of that project. So yeah, that's one thing. Staying engaged with news topics is
I
definitely a
want to
challenge.
have. I don't. I try to talk about things where I don't have a level of fluency with it, and where I can.
Yeah, same.
There's so many nuances with conflict. As
Hmm.
I read, I'm like, oh my god, there's so much. There's so many different rabbit holes I can go into with Israel and Palestine. And like a
Hmm.
friend of mine, because I'm a very vocal Mom Donnie support. Like I love our mayor. I love him.
I'm very jealous.
I love him. I'm sorry. Like he could still mess up. He's a politician, but right now I'm like in love with our
He's
man.
actually trying, which is such a like I have my criticisms of Mondani, of course, as well. Like I'm a leftist. As leftists, we're going to be critical, but the fact that he's actually trying, it really shows you the difference that makes, and just the goodwill he's cultivating with the Democratic Party's base. Like the fact that he's essentially a kingmaker now, and is able to open the door behind him and let more socialist candidates in. I think that's really significant. It
Huge because
feels like a turning
it'll
point.
help his agenda in Albany, and it'll help his agenda federally, and
Yeah.
it'll in the cause, and people can begin to see. But a dear friend of mine, we've been friends for like 15 years. He's a Jew hater. He like is sending me all
Oh
this stuff. He's
no.
really upset with me because I support Mom Donnie, and he's a Jew hater. And then he'll send me something, and I'm like, I just don't believe that. I don't believe he's a Jew hater. And this is a person I love and care about, and
Mhm.
so it's like
Yeah.
that he's hurt. It feels it's hard, but it's also like
Yeah, it's like you're falling for right-wing propaganda and propaganda by lobbies that are spending a lot of money to make Americans think that any and all criticism of
he
Israel
was
is
he was raised
anti-Semitic.
he was raised Orthodox. He's done.
Hmm.
He's been to Israel. I don't. I haven't asked him if he's a Zionist, but like I
It's hard
think
to navigate that as a friend, probably. Like that would be really uncomfortable.
and I also I'm like I can't tell. Who am I to tell a Jewish person what's anti-Semitic or not? Like, do you know what I mean?
Hmm.
Like, you know what I mean? Like, I do believe that equating anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism is not correct.
Hmm.
I mean, I think there is a difference between
Yeah.
a Jewish people, and a nation state are very different
Right.
things. And I think, like, if we just like hated all of them, all Americans because Trump is, started a war and is doing everything terror. Like there are
Hmm.
people, like there are Jewish people, and this is a religion, and then there's a state that is doing certain policies, and so I see that distinction, but there are people
Hmm.
people I love who don't. People I
Hmm.
love and respect who believe that anti-Zionism is in fact anti-Semitism. So I can't tell a Jewish person, like I just don't feel like that's, as a black person, I feel like most black people, like you can't telling a black person like how to feel about what they interpret as racist or not feels not like the most appropriate thing. So I just don't feel like I can tell a Jewish person, like,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
a
No. Yeah. I totally understand that. It's hard. Like it's complicated, right? Because there's a real history of trauma there and whatnot.
It is the trauma piece that I feel most.
Yeah.
And maybe some indoctrination, but the trauma piece
Definitely
is so crucial. But like, how do we? I think the piece around like loving each other, like and being critical of institutions, which I've always said. Apparently, Michael Brooks said that too, Hassan.
Yeah.
And I did Fear, and he was like, Michael, this is Michael Brooks. I've been saying this for years. I didn't realize Michael Brooks. Be critical of institutions and structures and love individuals.
Yeah, exactly.
We need to be friends with them, but we can love them from a distance with healthy boundaries. I'm not saying like, go and be love from a distance, but like have grace for individuals and be critical of institutions. And
yeah.
And
I think that is I think that's always something that I try to find myself doing, because I can sometimes be ruthless, because I feel like I kind of have to match the energy of.
You go after individuals a lot, but like there's also, if you're in service, I think there's a thing about power. There's with that, I don't know if I could go hard like you do. I appreciate it, but it's trust me, I appreciate it. I'm entertained for sure. That's part of the reason I live for you. That's part of the reason.
Well, thank you.
But like, I have found lately, the first time I called out an individual politician, like, I think we're in a new era now. I remember I did it in 2025. I was, trans rights rally in LA, and I named Newsom, and I went all on Newsom in the speech. It was right after he had I think we had Charlie Kirk on, actually.
When he threw trans people under a bus.
And he was saying how his son is a fan of Charlie Kirk. And something Olayemi said in one of her things is like, your son isn't listening to Charlie Kirk? Like, what? Like,
yeah.
Like, but no, for real, like, just to think about it, it's like, Charlie Kirk is the dude who said, if there's a black pilot, I'm gonna wonder if he's qualified. Charlie Kirk is deeply homophobic and transphobic, and like your son is listening to him. Like, that's not a parenting win right there. That's a moment of self-reflection. But the question is, luckily I don't have children, but if it were me, I would be like, I would sit down and I would sit down with my child and I would have a conversation with them about like anti-racism and like, and white supremacy, and like I probably wouldn't invite him on my podcast and say, my son loves you.
My son's a huge fan.
It's
not like your son is a fan of like Pokemon or some comic book. Like, we're talking about a white supremacist. It's outrageous. Like, I was as outraged as you were.
Ability to call them, and hopefully we won't lose our jobs for like saying this now. It's been a minute. Hopefully that we can actually like say who Charlie Kirk was. This is another way that white supremacy works in this country, and just Republicans in general. Like. Republicans can say anything they want about leftists and Democrats, and the second like a Democratic account calls Stephen Miller like ugly or whatever they called him,
God,
it's like a whole week of news cycles of outrage when like the president, when Stephen Miller himself says the most egregious, it's like so insane. And the inability to call a thing, it's the unreality, the inability,
and the double standard.
And that's why I'm feeling a bit more emboldened to name names. Because the truth in fascism, this unreality, is a key part of how fascism works. And so to have the courage to speak the truth is one of the most important things we need right now. We need fierce, ferocious truth, like empirical truth, like reality, because the unreality that fascism stokes, we have to be fighting this fascism on
it'll suck the whole country into a black hole if we don't actually fight that unreality. It's essential that we do that.
And it's so weak. So the racism of Trump and the Republicans, and they get so offended. Like I'm gobsmacked at how offended they get when you call them racist, as they do the most racist, like the Nazi rally at MSG. I still am like, I'm just,
Hmm.
I'm gobsmacked that people were like offended that we called that a Nazi rally when it was a Nazi rally.
Pretty explicitly. Like I
Yes,
feel like it was
literally
transparently Nazi.
harkening back to the Nazi rally of the 1930s, was it? At Madison Square Garden. I mean, it's like,
There's so many parallels too. Like if you look at the actual speech in the 19, like I actually found that. I don't know if I put it in my video, but I watched portions of the speech from the 1930s, and I compared it with like that one, and I'm like, man, history really is cyclical, isn't it? That's wild to see. It's like
it's so
surreal.
wild. And just, we have to be able to like call it the alternative facts. Kellyanne Conway, I still think there was something brilliant about that in the
Hmm.
most corrupt, like fucked up way possible. But
Yeah, yeah.
alternative facts, when I think did she not coin that on Meet the Press? I feel
I
like
think she did. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that was
I think
her.
she coined that on Meet the Press, and they're alternative facts. And I'm
Yeah.
like, wow, you really, wow.
They're
They're doing
creative in their diabolical nature.
what? I'm sorry.
They're very creative in how diabolical they are. They are innovative in like the ways they come up with the policies they cook up to fuck us over. Like even though it's
But
terrible
that's
to
actually
see,
easier. Making up fake outrage is actually easier than addressing real problems.
that's
Like,
and that's why they do it.
yeah, I mean, their endless ability to manufacture um, a crisis that doesn't exist is astounding. It really is. But
It
what I
is.
the one last thing I will say though is that when the Lewis Powell memo, right, from 1971.
Mhm.
I was not aware of it until a couple of years ago. It was like an 8-page memo, for those people who don't know, that was only for the Chamber of Commerce. It wasn't supposed to be released to the public. And he basically outlined 8 ways the corporate America to take over the country, right? And 6 months later, Nixon appointed him to the Supreme Court. And one of the catalysts of that he was frustrated with was Ralph Nader at the time in 1971. And right after, he was frustrated with New York Times coverage, specifically because the New York Times was covering all these, like the gay rights movement, the black rights movement that had emerged in the 1960s, the women's rights movement. And they were covering Ralph Nader's consumer protection cause a lot in the New York Times. And when they were covered, you get covered in the New York Times in 1971, you'd end up on the nightly news. And so Ralph Nader was getting a lot of press to hold corporations accountable to put out safe products. And so Lewis Powell, among, one of the things in the memo was like telling publications, like, if you, like New York Times, if you feature this man, we're not going to advertise in your newspaper. That was one thing. It was also a plan to take over universities, to take over basically every institution. And in the wake of that Powell memo, the Heritage Foundation forms like a year later, a think tank that started creating model legislation. I forget the name of them. They emerged. The Federalist Society in the early 80s emerged to take over the courts. So they created infrastructure with a plan to capture every institution in this country. And Lewis Powell actually wrote one of the, I think it was 1978. He was the first person, I think, to say, well, he wasn't the first one to say it, but he made a decision that like was referenced in Citizens United, because other in the 18 something, they said, Supreme Court said the corporations are people. They've been pulling that for a long time.
Yeah.
Long time. And that is, I think, like, looking at the history of this country, protecting property and corporations has always been more paramount than protecting people from
Exactly.
and so that to me requires a page 1 rewrite of our Constitution. After South Africa abolished apartheid, they wrote a new Constitution. So we need a new Constitution. But at the same time, I think it's really important to note that, like, the damage done by Doge will probably take decades to repair, if it can be. Which is, I mean, the damage that was done there to the administrative state, which is all in Project 2025. Like, they just
They had a plan, they had a dream, and it is coming true
So
before our
we
very
need to
eyes.
Project 2029.
Yes.
Some people have floated that, but for real though, like for real,
Yeah.
because
An
they were
actual plan.
like, but they think tanks got together. Who are I think who are we? Like they can't be people bought and paid for by corporations. But
Right.
who are our think tanks? Like who are the organizations getting together right now to create a Project 2029 on the left? And that
Yeah.
is that's a fundamental question, because
Right.
we've been wrecked. And the fact that Biden didn't get rid of the Postmaster General DeGroot, what was his
Oh,
name?
Louis
Joy.
DeJoy. Right.
Joy. He's still there, girl. He's still there, fucking up the post office. Like there's like
It's just
so
agonizing to think of the
endless.
work.
It's endless. So there's so many, and not to have. I mean, Biden was, bless his heart, he wasn't well, and he couldn't communicate. But I mean, the Lena Khan of it all, and some of his
Yeah.
domestic policies were
Mm-hmm.
like the Build Back. If he had not separated that Build Back Better bill,
It'd be a different country. Yeah. I think that Trump would have not had as easy of a time winning. Yeah. No,
but I mean, he tries to undo everything that Biden did. But on day one, prescription.
I know. Yeah, it is wild. Yeah. Yeah. Laverne, I don't know what we're gonna do. I think that yeah. We do.
We the you're the pessimist. I'm the
optimist. More optimistic, at least, right? Optimist, yeah, that's fair.
But can we invite in this moment when for us to mobilize? I mean, I'm not an organizer, I'm not a community, but like we need, like, I think the lesson is this project that the Republican Party has really, like, is basking in right now, has been 50 years in the making. 50 years in the making,
right.
with disciplined messaging, policy prescriptions, and a deep understanding of policy as well. A deep understanding of how policies and how things work. There was a few Supreme Court decisions that came down today that would, like, make it, you can still, what was it? Suing a state or whatever for or suing the government for something, like, it basically makes it more difficult to do that. You can still do it if there was some malfeasance, but like having cause to do it, right? So they're like, they erode the laws in ways where it doesn't explicitly, like, say you can discriminate, but the impact is that people's rights are being, like, just gutted, like citizens' rights are being gutted. So there's a deep understanding of how the system works and policy. So there needs to be a robust plan for the people to actually arrest, to take away corporate power, to take back power from the corporations and bring it back to the people. And then have state, locally, and federally have a country that as rich as we are and people are starving, as rich as we are and people don't have health care, that people are still homeless. $1 trillion, like we could, water in Flint hasn't been fixed. That's a disgrace. It's a disgrace. It just is. It's a disgrace. And so it's a moral issue, but it's a corruption issue. We do not have politicians working on our behalf. And in the Electoral College, I mean, like, full systemic restructuring constitutionally. And I think so there's a like getting our organizations together to get a plan, but then, like, we maybe, if we can, like, I know there's we're thinking about general strike, we may be able to mobilize people to get a constitutional convention. Like, I don't think that's improbable, but because why not start working towards a constitutional convention to, like, We haven't had an amendment in a long time, honey. Maybe we need to,
Yeah.
you know what I mean?
No, I'm 100% on board. As hard as it would be, I think that that is a goal that we should work to because I mean, like, first of all, like, if you're a leftist in America, there is something inherently revolutionary about that. Because there isn't really a left in America. We say liberals are left, but really, we're talking about like leftists. We're talking about anti-capitalists and whatnot. But yeah, I love the goal of like a constitutional amendment. And one thing that I will say, like if we want to end on a positive note, is that I think that with regard to like this whole project 2029 or like a left-leaning Democratic equivalent, I think that we're finally starting to see a little bit of a paradigm shift last night with the three
with the
or
voters, with the voters.
yeah, and so the voters are waking up, and so now it's a matter of, okay, we're starting to get the personnel in place. We just need to build the infrastructure and set out a clear vision, which the left has actually, which is why I think they're ascending, and just do it. And know it's going to take a
And
while,
it
and
re-
just
and
do it.
make and make sure we remember it's about movement building.
Exactly,
That
right.
we have to, that people have to apply pressure, because I
Hmm.
mean there is an interesting argument that someone made about a Ketanji Brown Jackson being appointed, and Biden's commitment to having a Black woman. There's critiques of that. It limits your pool, but that was a reaction to the protests of 2020. That was
Yeah,
like they had to do something. They didn't pass the John Lewis voting rights.
that's right. It was catastrophic.
um, Catastrophic. I really thought I really thought to protect their own electoral interests, they would do that. And they just,
Yeah.
I still don't get that. I don't. I'm like,
The most perplexing thing, I
that
think, in
is
the modern era.
perplexing, because
Yeah.
the voting, because they could, I mean, they could begin to supplant the Supreme Court. I mean, the Supreme Court has run amok with voting rights.
Hmm.
But the second they got it on pre-clearance in 2013, the later that day, the next day they had laws ready. They had laws ready that, and if people remember, I don't know if people remember, but the first election after pre-clearance was gutted was 2016. I think it was like 20% fewer Black people voted
Wow.
in that election. The numbers went back up in 2020, but 20% fewer Black people voted in the first presidential election after pre-clearance was gutted, Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act.
Mission accomplished on their part. They got exactly what they
Mail
wanted.
voting, I think, actually helped in 2020,
Hmm.
and just people were just more. There was a pandemic; people had time to vote. I think that because
Yeah.
this, but it was a pandemic. We had more mail voting, but a lot of people weren't working.
Hmm.
We need a national
True.
holiday for people to vote, right? Like,
Yeah.
like mail voting and national holiday, automatic voter registration. These are basic things that
Yeah.
Republicans have understood for decades disadvantages them. The
Hmm.
more people vote, historically, the less likely Republicans are to win.
Yeah. Yeah. No, exactly.
It's
We're simpatico.
2024. I'm still not 100% convinced that 2024 wasn't rigged.
I mean, in certain ways, it really, I don't think we have free and fair elections, especially when you look at voter suppression, voter roll purges, how they remove polling places.
And then invalidating votes after they've been cast, and
Yeah.
like basically contesting ballots that they can do, like they do in Georgia. Palace, what's his name? Greg Palast.
Oh, Greg Palace. Yeah. Yeah. I've
His
seen
work
his.
around that, which no one talks about much about. But
Hmm.
the voter challenges and the voter purges, that's old school. No one talks
Yeah.
about that. I wonder. FD Signifier, I mentioned him. He dismissed it.
Mm.
In hand. So maybe I haven't read anything invalidating the research. It basically is like
Hmm.
data from the government that he's using.
Yeah. I
But
mean, I consider like if you are putting just one polling place in a majority minority district, you're trying to rig the election. You know what I mean? Like that's not fair. So
and the fact, I mean, in Georgia, when they were like, you can't bring water to people who are standing in line. And
yeah.
in Georgia, there's lines that people are in line for like 8 to 12 hours. Why are they in line for 8 to 12 hours? Because they've closed so many polling places. So they've closed all these polling places to make it more difficult for people to vote. People don't know where their polling place is. And then you can't even bring water to people who are in line waiting. Like that the egregious nature of that is just
it's so nakedly like what they're trying to do.
Just said, okay.
Yeah. It's there's an endless amount of fucked up things about our system that needs fixing, and it's really cathartic to know that like someone like you, like a celebrity, like it's so cool that like you're tapped in and you just you don't have to care, but you do, and I love that.
I do though. I don't know. I feel like it mean caring. Yeah, it doesn't. I have to. I don't know. I have to.
Yeah.
But it also is. There are consequences to me, like speaking out. But I had a moment.
Yeah.
I had a lot of fear because I'm trans and this anti-trans moment. And this year at the Animal Farm premiere, I was like, it's Orwell. I can speak freely. I spoke freely, and I felt like myself. And I was like,
I love that.
No matter the consequences, it's like, no matter the consequences, what I understand and what I know for sure is that we are in a deeply fascist moment, and we have to make some decisions. And I've been saying I'd rather be a Christian Dior than a Coco Chanel. Do you know, does this make any sense to you?
Not necessarily to me.
So Coco Chanel, or Chanel, was a Nazi sympathizer. She worked with the Nazis. She was a straight up Nazi, basically. And then there was the New Look. There was a mini series about it that was on Showtime or HBO, one of them. And Christian Dior actually worked with the resistance, and and they were contemporaries.
Oh, I do not know any of this lore.
Yeah. Anyway, so but then when you go and read about Chanel, oh my gosh, she was like, they softened her in the miniseries. She was straight up like, she was anti-Semitic. She was straight up like, oh yeah.
That's
and Dior worked with the resistance. So it's like this is a moment in history where when the record comes in, I wanted
You're going to be on the right side.
Just for myself,
Yeah.
That understanding, like this is because this is what it's Nazi Germany. It really, it's like, it's not. I mean, the concentration camps, the detention centers are less in the media now, but in New Jersey, like it's a mess. It's a mess.
Yeah, it's obvious what is happening, and it's I think really nice to have people like you say that, to use the platform that you have
hear it.
Say that.
What's funny about me when I do, I remember like a few times, I'll be on a red carpet and I'll say something, and then it'll be on Instagram and I'll look at a comment. Oh, she's saying that now. Where was she when she was dating her MAGA boyfriend? And it's like,
oh no, you can't look at the comments.
I'm fine. And like, I literally at one point I just wrote, I was like, I'm not above reproach. You can be critical of me, and that's fine, but it's not going to stop me from standing up for what I believe. It's not going to stop me from fighting for what I believe. And then, when have you ever, I fell in love with a human being who had some really bad politics, but when have you ever seen me tout a conservative policy or a MAGA policy? I never voted for the motherfucker. I voted for Obama. I actually changed my voter registration in 2020. I was always an independent. I changed, realizing, I finally understanding like the importance of primaries, because I was always an independent. I changed my registration to Democrat in 2020 so I could vote for Bernie in the primary. I am for reproductive justice, bodily autonomy, trans rights, rights for Black people, a fucking living wage. Like we need a $35, $40 minimum wage. We haven't raised the minimum wage in forever. That's just insane. So these things. So criticize me because I fell in love with somebody, because I fucked the enemy, or whatever you want to say. But I'm going to advocate for the things I think are important, which are like, Medicare for all, living wage, bodily autonomy, civil rights. These are the things I care about. Corporate money out of politics. I've never I've never wavered. I think people assume. I don't know if they. Do you think this about men, that men adopt, like if they're dating conservative woman, that men adopt the politics of their like conservative female partner, or is it like
Yeah,
women? I don't know.
I've seen that sometimes just in personal lives where like a male kind of adopted the politics of his girlfriend. But I feel like you don't have to really explain yourself because you've kind like I won't hold that against you. You've been ripped to shreds for it, and I feel like you everything that you're
I mean, it's
saying
okay.
is
I
on
made it
point.
public. I made it public, and I think it's all fine. It's really all fine, and it's like there are people who will never fuck with me again because
Yeah. But
there's
I mean, you
definitely.
have never once wavered, which is why I think that so many people appreciate you because like it's easy to just kind of like check out when you get criticism because it's hard. Like I can only imagine somebody in your position getting criticism, but like that's why we love you is because you are always so curious, which a lot of people just are not, especially celebrities. Like people I think have a more negative view of celebrities, but like you
Have
are.
to be open to feedback, but it's like you, but
Yeah, and I think that that's why people really value you because
what
you're
foundation?
so gracious.
A lot of actors, they study acting, and they haven't, like, what kind of foundation, political foundation, are you working with be able to engage with critique? Like some people don't have a
Right.
foundation to engage in a way, and have blind spots. So
Yeah.
it's not easy,
Hmm.
especially if your politics are trash, or you're haven't developed a political identity, and you just and don't, or maybe not so informed. Actually informed is a lot of work. Actually,
It
like
is.
reading and knowing what's happening is hard.
Mhm.
It's not hard. It's work, and it's
It takes
something you
effort.
have to take time to
Yeah.
do. And it does help if you have some kind of foundation to go into an issue, like, right, to go into,
Which you very clearly do, and that like that's so obvious. Like even reading your book, talking to you, and that's why I think so many people love you. That's why I love you. That's why my audience loves you.
I
So
love
like
you.
just know that you are so appreciated despite whatever comment you see, and what you say and what you do is really really important. So honestly, like thank you so much, Laverne.
Thank you. I'm imperfect, and I
Of
I
course.
concede that I remain teachable, and I'm imperfect, but I'm gonna speak the truth as I understand it. I'm gonna keep trying to learn more and do better. And I love supporting independent leftist media.
Oh,
I'm so
thank you.
grateful for your work, and I've done a zillion podcasts, but I'm like, I have to come over to, like,
I
more.
appreciate that so much, honestly. I really do.
I do. I hope, at the end of the day, I just hope it helps, because it's like, I just hope
Yes.
of this will be the, we're going to go on forever, but my prayer, as you read in my book, to myself, is, God, give me permission to do this imperfectly, and allow me to be of
Hmm.
service. So
I love that. As a non-religious person, I truly love that. I think that is a wonderful philosophy and just
I'm
like
not
thought.
religious, I'm spiritual.
Yeah. Okay. There you go. Yeah. No, I
I
whatever works. I
study
love it.
religious, but, like, I say God, but
Yeah.
organized religion is obviously corrupt as fuck. But,
Right.
like,
Right.
I
Right.
do believe that there is an energy, a source, inner power greater than myself. Yeah, I know.
Mm.
I'm
I like that
not
though. I
mad at
like
my
that
atheist
sentiment.
friends, but that's me. That's me.
Yeah. Well, Laverne, again, I took up so much of your time. I cannot overstate how
It was my
appreciative I am.
pleasure.
Thank
This
you
was
so
fun.
much.